happiest moment of my life was when my son Stephen and my daughter Sarah were born. I always wanted to become a mother for as long as I can remember, and having children to love was all I ever wanted in the world. I married a great guy a few years after college, and we built a home together with our children. I thought I'd done everything right, but unfortunately things went south when the great guy I'd married turned into a monster. Our marriage fell apart, and out of spite, he ripped my children away from me. I wasn't going to let that happen, so I took my kids and ran as far away as I could. Life as a single mother was difficult, and what was even worse was that my children weren't happy that I'd taken them away. They refused to talk to me no matter what I said, and I knew it was all because their demon of a father had painted me as the bad guy. Despite their ominous silence whenever I entered the room, I still loved them. Stephen and Sarah had just turned 17, and I knew separating them from their father during their teenage years was hard on them. I hoped that one day, after their teenage years had long passed, they would understand why I had to take them far away and love me again as their mother. But things only got worse. Both Stephen and Sarah had stopped eating, and it began to worry me after I'd prepared full meals, only for them to leave everything completely untouched at the table. I tried to convince them to eat something, saying, "I understand you both are angry that I took you away from your father, but starving yourselves won't accomplish anything. You're still growing children, and you need to eat. I've accepted the fact that you aren't speaking to me, but I won't accept this. You're both getting really pale, and Sarah, your bones are starting to show. I don't know what your father said about me to drive you both to these extremes, but please eat the meals I made for you." Both Stephen and Sarah stared at me with a hollow look in their eyes, and I ran out of the room crying. I knew their father, Nathan, had probably told them all sorts of lies and atrocities about me, which is why they'd started acting this way out of spite. I was planning on having a long talk with him the following morning, but their brute of a father had somehow found us. He'd been stalking us for a while now, ever since I took my kids back, and I had to move to new places just to get away from him. I could feel my heart racing in my chest as I heard him banging on the door of our new home. "Please open the door, Stacy. I know you're going through a lot right now, but I just want to talk. Get the hell away from us, Nathan. I know you just want to take my kids away and put them back in that dark place you'd left them, but I won't let you." I quickly grabbed Stephen and Sarah, and I took them through the back door to the car. Nathan had heard the engine start, so he ran in front of the vehicle, saying, "I'm not going to let you leave until we talk, and you stop this madness. I'm done listening to your lies, Nathan. You've turned my kids against me. Now they won't talk or eat. Stacy, you're unwell. Please just get out of the car, and we can talk." I took a long look at the man I once loved and realized that nothing had changed. He kept trying to make me believe that I was unwell or sick in the hat, which is why I left, and I wasn't going to let him gaslight me anymore. So I stepped on the gas. He jumped out of the way at the last second, and I escaped with my kids. But it wasn't long before he tracked us down again. I took out the metal baseball bat and stood between him and my children. Nathan attempted to turn them against me with his usual lies again as he said, "Stacy, you're not well. You need help. Just look at what you're doing to our children. Please let them rest." He was an expert at brainwashing Stephen and Sarah. So I turned to them and said, "Don't listen to him. I'm your mother. I'm not unwell. I love you. Your misogynistic pig of a father just thinks a single mother isn't enough to raise her own children. And that's why he's trying to take you away from me. But I'll never let that happen." Nathan didn't even let me finish before he denied the whole thing. "That's not true. Stacy, please open your eyes and see the horrific things you've done to our kids. I can't believe I married you. How could I love such a garbage human being who would divorce me when I was at my lowest and tried to take my kids away?" Nathan was crying now in an attempt to gain sympathy from our children. He then looked at me with his cynical eyes as he said, "That's not what happened, Stacy, and you know it. I won't blame you because you aren't in your right mind, and you've somehow erased the truth from your memory since the accident happened. But this is going too far. Our children are dead. You were driving and you didn't see the truck. Both Stephen and Sarah died on impact, but you managed to survive. You're a liar. That never happened. There was no accident. And my children are right here beside me. Listen to me, Stacy. You couldn't handle the grief when you woke up and you went mad. So you had to be admitted into a psychiatric ward. However, you unfortunately escaped and exhumed our children's remains from their graves before fleeing with their decaying bodies. Can't you see that the corpses you've been running around with are the rotting remains of our children? Doesn't the smell bother you? I still don't know why you exhumed their bodies or what you plan to do next, but you're a danger to yourself and everyone around you. The authorities have already been informed, and they'll be here any minute. So please, you need to come back to the psychiatric ward. I'm doing this so our children can finally rest in peace, and for you to get the help you so desperately need." I was horrified. I couldn't believe my own husband could spew such false and horrible atrocities out of his mouth. While I could admit that my children had lost some skin and were looking bony due to their loss of appetite, they were still my children, regardless of their desolate state. They didn't die in that crash, but no one would believe me. That's why I had to take them out of the ground. And I wasn't going to let him put them back in that dark wooden box. So I struck him hard on the head with a metal bat and left his motionless body bleeding while I took Stephen and Sarah to the car. I told them that we were safe now and that we were going to get out of the city. However, they didn't respond as they just stared at me with their hollow eyes in silence. I didn't really care any more that they refused to talk to me. And I assured them that it didn't matter if they didn't eat my meals or how bad they smelled, because I would be by their side forever. I picked a few maggots off Stephen's face before starting the engine. I was their mother, and nothing, not even death, would ever separate them from me. When I was little, my mother always used to tell me that she loved me more than anything in the universe, and that she would always do everything in her power to make sure I was happy. These words used to bring me comfort in my early childhood. But unfortunately, that all changed when I realized just how far my mother was willing to go to keep her word. I witnessed her commit unspeakable atrocities for my sake, and I've never been the same to this very day. My father abandoned my mother and me for a younger woman after I turned 14. He didn't even file for a divorce, as he just fled the state with his new wife to avoid paying child support. Things began to fall apart pretty quickly as my mother was a traditional housewife who didn't work at my father's request. It was really difficult for her to stand up on her own 2 feet. But despite that, she did everything she could to support us by taking on several odd jobs. I tried to help out as I attempted to find jobs of my own, but my mother wouldn't let me, as she said it was her duty to provide and that I was still too young to be working. Despite how hard she worked, we barely had enough to cover rent, and we had even less for groceries. It wasn't long before we began rationing our food, and we often starved ourselves on many nights. There was one particular night when I was starving so badly that I began to cry. So my mother came into my room and held me in her arms as she said, "I know things are pretty hard for us right now, Charlie, and it breaks my heart seeing you like this. But I promise you that from tonight henceforth you'll never go hungry again. I have a plan, and once I carry it out, we'll go back to having full plates for dinner like we used to." I could tell my mother was just trying to comfort me, as even at that young age I knew just how bad things were. We still hadn't paid the rent, and I knew there were still many hungry nights ahead of us. However, my mother had this disturbing look in her eyes, and to my surprise, she kept her word as we had full plates of dinner the following night. While I was ecstatic to eat, I couldn't really tell what type of protein was on my plate, and I remember asking my mother about the mystery meat. "Hey, Mom, what type of meat is this? I don't recognize the texture or taste, and how did you get so much of it?" My mother then calmly looked at me and said, "There's no need to worry about where the meat came from or how I got it, Charlie. Just be grateful that we now have more than enough to eat for dinner, just like I promised." I could tell my mother wasn't going to tell me the truth, and even though I was worried, I scarfed it all down as I was starving. However, even though I ate it all, my gut kept telling me that something was wrong. The following nights, my mother returned with the same bags of mystery meat, and every time I tried to pry, she would look at me with an eerie smile before uttering the words, "Bon appetit, Charlie." I thought about leaving things be, as even though I didn't know the origin of the mystery meat, we weren't starving anymore. But my curiosity kept eating away at me inside. So one night I decided to follow her. I trailed my mother after she left the house, and it only took a couple of minutes before I uncovered the horrific truth behind the mystery meat. I watched in horror as my mother lured a stray dog that I'd seen around the neighborhood into a dark alley. I can't bring myself to recount the morbid atrocities my mother committed against that little animal with a large cleaver. I threw up all over myself, and I ran back home crying. After I regained my composure, I waited for my mother to arrive, and as soon as she walked through the door, I screamed the words, "How could you do something so horrible, Mom? I followed you, and I saw what you did." My mother, who now had tears in her eyes, calmly looked at me and said, "Please don't look at me like that, Charlie. I am your mother, and I did what I had to make sure we could survive, even if it meant doing those heinous things to put food on your plate. We had other choices. I could have worked and supported you. Anything but this. There were only strays, Charlie. No one is going to miss them. Please don't make me feel even worse than I already do. Even if you had helped out by working, that wouldn't have changed our situation. We had no choice. So please just go to your room and forget everything you saw tonight." I couldn't believe what my own mother was saying. I'd always loved animals, and even if she asked me to let it go, I couldn't stomach the horrors I'd witnessed that night. So I ran to my room and called the authorities. My mother was arrested and formally charged with aggravated animal cruelty, a felony carrying a sentence of up to 3 years in state prison. I was taken into Child Protective Services, and I can never forget the look on her face as they took her away. The decision that night has haunted me ever since. I kept telling myself I made the right decision by calling the authorities, but I couldn't help but feel like I'd betrayed my mother. I spent several nights cursing my father for putting us in that situation. But in the end, I blamed myself, as I knew the only reason my mother did what she did was to put food on my plate. I've always hated my mother with a burning passion. I know this is a horrible thing to say about your own mother, but from the moment I was born, my mother has always been a terrible monster. She always used to look at me with disgust in her eyes for as long as I can remember, and she went out of her way to make my childhood a living hell. I never understood why my own mother hated me so much. And it wasn't until I was a little older that my grandmother explained the reasons behind my mother's hatred, as it all began before I was even born. My father's name was Nathaniel Green, and he was a soldier who died during active service, just a couple of months after marrying my mother. She was pregnant with twins at the time of his death, and the doctor told my mother that she was expecting a boy and a girl. My grandmother told me that our mother named us Marcus and Amelia, but she could tell she was more excited for Marcus to be born, as she believed he was all she had left of her late husband. Unfortunately, at the time of our birth, I was the only twin to survive. The doctors described it as an exceptionally rare and a typical case of fetus in Fu, my brother's spine, and partially formed bones were discovered in my abdomen, and they had to be surgically removed before they could cause serious complications. My mother, who needed a son to remind her of her dead husband, despised me for eating my brother Marcus and constantly bared me for something I had no control over. She would often say things like, "You shouldn't have been the one to survive. I couldn't have been my boy, Marcus. It was all I had. But you wanted to hurt me, so you consumed your own brother. You greedy demon." I can't even repeat some of the more disturbing things she said throughout my hellish childhood, as I would often cry myself to sleep as her words always cut so deep. I often spent most of my time with my grandmother whenever my mother couldn't stand the sight of me. No matter how many years passed, her hatred toward me never went away. So immediately after high school, I went to college and I never came back. I didn't speak to my mother again until I was 27. I'd gotten a call from her nursing home, telling me that she'd fallen ill and was asking to see me. I ignored their initial call as I didn't want anything to do with her. However, the nursing home kept calling back, saying that she hadn't been feeling too well lately. And despite our bad relationship, they were urging me to visit her before it was too late. I wondered why she wanted to see me after all these years, and I couldn't even imagine what she would say. I mulled over the decision for some time, and against my better judgment, I went to see her. I arrived at the nursing home at around 9:30 p.m. that night. After I walked into her room, I saw my mother sitting next to the window. A few seconds of silence passed before she slowly turned her head and said, "Is that you, Amelia? I didn't think you'd come. I didn't think I was going to come either." And to be honest with you, I'm still wondering why I'm even standing here next to the woman who made my life a living hell. I've made a lot of mistakes, and during these past few months I've realized that there is one last thing that I must do. You must have gone senile in this nursing home. If you think an apology is going to cut it after all these years, you're mistaken. Nevertheless, I'm still willing to hear it. Your apology isn't really going to change anything or fix the horrors you put me through. But I'm going to be the bigger person and accept it, because even if you were a monster, you're still my mother and I forgive you. The room was dimly lit, and I couldn't really see my mother's face, but I could hear her whisper the words, "Come closer." So I stepped toward her. As I stood in front of my mother, I now noticed the sinister grin she had on her face. Before I could even say anything, she took out a jagged knife and pierced it through my abdomen. I can't even begin to explain the feelings I felt as my mother cut me open with a knife while she screamed, "Where is Marcus? Where is Marcus, you evil child? I have to cut him out of you. I have to save him. Why did you have to eat him? Don't you understand? He was all I had left. Give him back. Give him back to me. I curse the day I birthed you, and I'll rip my son out of your bloody corpse, even if it's the last thing that I do." I was losing a lot of blood, but I managed to violently push her off me during the struggle. She fell in an unnatural position and snapped her neck right in front of me. The other residents of the nursing home who heard the commotion called an ambulance, and I was rushed to the hospital. Even to this day, I can still recall the look of pity on the officer's face as he took my statement after my surgery. There isn't a day that goes by when I don't regret my decision to go back to that nursing home to see my mother. Despite the years of therapy and my attempts to move on, I couldn't just accept the fact that the very last memory I shared with my own mother was a gruesome scene where she was trying to kill me because I'd eaten a son who never even existed.